Hello, Matesh.
Hey Mark, good time of day. I'm assuming it's a morning for you, right?
It's 6 a.m., yes.
Oh, ouch, that hurts.
Oh, no,
Good
no,
morning.
it's fine. Most days start at 5 when you work for New York Bank out of Seattle.
Ah, okay.
It's
Then
all
it's not
good. It's
that
all
bad.
good. Yeah, I'm looking for an email right now because we have a template for our agenda that I'm trying to figure out where this is stored. Um, mailing list. Let's see. Just giving people a couple of minutes to join. I could have sworn I must have saved it in some.
It's in the meeting invite as well,
Yeah,
I think.
there is like an agenda document.
Yeah, it's in the
Standard.
meeting invite, Mark. I can share that.
Oh yeah, can you please?
Hey everyone.
Hi.
Hey.
Oh, there we go. That's the meeting agenda. I see it now. I see it.
I just literally pasted where Dan
Yeah,
had
that's fine.
pasted.
I was
Same
trying to
time.
trying to beat you, but
Okay. We really need like a note taker because I don't think I can run the meeting and fill out all the data at the same time. But if nobody does, I will do it from memory later. So, welcome all. I'm just going over the email. Yeah. So I attended IETF Whimsy meeting last week, and then also the CCC. Or maybe IETF was a couple of weeks ago, and then the CCC, sorry, the OC3 conference last Thursday. And so my biggest takeaway from OC3 is while tremendous progress is in fact being made, all the scenarios they're talking about is new code. And when we talk about the sort of, in this group, the trustworthy workload identity is really about uplift of the absolutely vast amount of code that is currently deployed. And it's, you know, the new scenarios will, of course, benefit from our work, but existing scenarios without our work have no chance. So, you know, I'm just hoping that we can get, you know, the sort of the nice to the nice velocity and traction that we need. And I also think we should be reaching out to some of the OC3 or the firms that presented their new tech at OC3 around container security, around this and that, and you know, see if they're interested in perhaps collaborating with us on this. Then I guess I wanted a little bit of feedback too. So we haven't really made a lot of progress on the gap analysis. So, and this was my idea. So I wanted to maybe hear the room's thoughts on maybe was it a good idea or not, because we're not getting the traction. And the idea was that before we know how to, you know, what to change in Spiffy, what to change in Whimsy, what to change in Toto, whatever, we need to understand where they stand with respect to you know, getting the trustworthy workload identity implemented. And again, it could be that people are busy. It could be that we've had a, you know, couple of weeks with this whole you know, time shift that confused everyone. But is it a good idea still? Do we have the volunteers to, you know, make it work?
I think, yeah, I mean, definitely gap analysis is not harmful. if we understand what they are doing and are they aligned with, or is there a stake for them in this area? It's good to know.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But for that, but then we then need, if we believe this is important work, then we need people to actually do the work. You know,
Yeah.
I did a little bit. I wrote some of my thoughts down,
Yeah.
but that's not enough. I'm not going to scale to the size
Yes.
of that undertaking. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mark.
we need a team. Yeah, we need a team contribution, not a solo contribution. Yes.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
was supposed to contribute something. I will contribute something. For me, it's the bandwidth problem. Being in a tiny team, and I'm the only one who can write this stuff. So, but I will by next week. I'll put something together about how we approach the problem and why we believe it's important indeed.
yeah,
As with regard to the spiffy and whimsy stuff, I don't have the bandwidth to dig super deep because our
yeah.
approach is fundamentally
Spiffy, I
different.
think I can take because I'm in conversations with Peter Casamy as the director of product, and they have this thing called ambient mode, which is the closest to what we're hoping to accomplish. And I was last we spoke a couple of weeks ago. I was going to talk to one of their engineers on this, so to start sort of looking at the actual the nuts and bolts of it. We haven't scheduled that meeting yet, but spiffy, I think I can handle. But in toto still needs work, and I think we have others that we agreed we want to engage.
Hey, on the in toto part, actually, sorry, just to introduce myself, guys. It's my first meeting of this forum. Mr. Middleton told me this is where the magic happens, and I believed him. Hopefully, he wasn't lying to me. I mean, I'm an architect at Intel, and my interest was, or today is, somewhat related to in toto. That's why I'm kind of asking the question. I mean, I'm not yet up to speed with what you guys especially want to analyze, so I think I'll need a meeting or two to get up to speed. But just to start with a question, like my idea of in toto in general was, I think it ends where, say, trusted workload identity takes on. Meaning, I thought, or my impression of in toto as a framework ends with the package installation. Like they provide you with the whole holistic life cycle and protections of the lineage of what is about to be installed. But I think their area of interest ends when it's instantiated. Like, is that first and foremost a good summary of where your thoughts are at? And then how you perceive in toto in this whole puzzle?
I don't know really much about in toto. It was a technology that was mentioned. I actually haven't even looked at it. No, so I cannot answer your question. But we're talking about effectively the thing meeting the requirements as stated that we're going to get to soon. And you may look at it and say in toto has nothing to do with it, then we should strike it off our list.
Well, I mean, it has relevance for sure. I'm just not sure if, in the respect of gap analysis, if they, would be providing gaps, or are they just a downstream dependency of the workload identity in order for it to be successful? But
again, without looking at the spec, I cannot really tell you. I can tell you, so like for instance, when it comes to SPIFFE, like a gap analysis thing would be the fact that SPIFFE requires node attestation, and confidential computing basically doesn't want to attest the node, it wants to attest itself, and the node has only limited interest. Maybe like you want to know the location of the node and a couple other things, but right, so there is and the way the API work in SPIFFE, where you go get the X509 certificate out of your node agent, it takes no parameters, and it basically requires on the node agent to be able to go introspect back into the requester. This is an architectural clash with what confidential computing hopes to accomplish. So that's why there is a gap, and we need to somehow close it.
Yeah,
but with in toto, I like literally, I would have to, I'm sure if I were to read it, I'd arrive at a similar, like there's only one truth there. I don't know what it is.
Mark, you just used the word clash, and then you use the word gap in the next sentence. Is there really a gap that we can fill, or is there truly a clash between the two approaches? So that's one of the, when I read the gap analysis, my perspective is that the approaches are orthogonal. I don't think we can reconcile them. But if you have a path to reconcile them, then there is a gap. Otherwise, it's a real clash.
Well, if you want to rename the document gap and clash analysis, that's fine. It's just they are there. We want them to be here, and
Fair enough. I just wanted to understand your perspective and your approach to this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just there are deltas, okay, or whatever you want to call them.
Got it.
And yeah. Anyway, so I will remind you. So hold on. I will. We have this our trustworthy workload identity document. I'll be dropping links in the chat as I go, so that you can follow along. So our folder is here. Over here, as usual, I have my Gmail thing open. So if you don't have access, I'll grant you access almost in real time. And then we have our old document in there called the Workload Identity Initiatives. And there is a bunch of stuff that we probably need to convert into like GitHub issues or whatever. But this is our old document. That was sort of on a dumping ground for the kinds of things we need to do. And there, when we talked about standards, we mentioned Spiffy, Whimsy, Salsa, and Toto, perhaps. We talked about some like PCI-related things. The gap analysis, again, there's a gap analysis with rats that at the time Yogesh and Hannes said they were going to do. PCI. David Quigley from Intel said he'd look at PCI. So anyway, please look over the doc, request access if you must, and I will, this is just something that we need to take, like, kind of probably kill this doc right now and convert it into a set of issues that we track. But this is the old thing that we have. All right, so when I sent out the agenda for today, I mentioned gap analysis, which again, please take ownership of whatever piece of it that you can. And, in a week, let's come back to this and see what progress has been made and, keep pushing until something is done. The next thing I want to do right now is I would like to go over the requirements document. Okay, so here's the history of the requirements document. I went up in front of the tag and then the attestation SIG, and I asked to have trustworthy workload identity considered as a table stakes, as the must-have feature for confidential computing. And I wrote this musings document that entered the GitHub in the attestation SIG. And it basically said these are the kinds of things that need to be done, and especially this is what needs to happen when it comes to attestation. So that was the old structure. I resurrected the doc, brought it back from attestation GitHub into our workload identity folder, and I edited it a little bit. So I don't want, like, the things that are in the definition of workload identity are no longer requirements to workload identity. Of course, like, we're not going to talk about those, repeat them. But this document has 9 core requirements, and then, 9 non-attestation requirements. And the last 4, maybe 5, they have to do specifically with the kinds of things that attestation needs to do. And so let me perhaps do this. Let me share my screen so we can go over this together. Sal, I saw your message. I just haven't had a chance to read it yet. Just need to rearrange my screen here. Apologize. And right. Now you should see my screen now.
Yeah, we can see that.
Awesome. Okay. But you see the trustworthy workload identity. That's right. For some reason, my browser just locked up. Oh, why? Hold on a second. Again, I'm sorry. It's wrong. Yeah, my browser, like my window isn't like scrolling. So I'm gonna have to stop sharing. I'm sorry, it's some software glitch on my end. Oh, now that okay. I stopped sharing and my screen woke up again. Let's try. Well, as soon as I share, Zoom doesn't let me. So, okay, I'm gonna have to ask somebody else to
Yeah, I
share their
can do that.
screen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can do that.
I blame Zoom. I don't know.
Just
So Osama was complaining about this document, and he said that, oh, I don't know what to do about it. This is not like a formal set of requirements. But neither is RATS a specification. It's more of a reference architecture. And again, I don't know how happy I am with RATS RFC, but let's at least see if we agree in principle on the requirements as written. If you believe they need to be significantly updated, then let's do that. And the way I see them, 1 through 9, we will address in this working group, and 10 through 14 will have to be done in the attestation SIG. Oh, and speaking of that, next Tuesday, I will not be able to attend the attestation SIG meeting because I'm in Chicago in business and and basically I'm an offsite. And I will still be able to do this meeting, but I'm not going to be able to do the attestation SIG. And if they're going to come back to any of this workload identity stuff, which last time was the only thing on their agenda, I need somebody or hopefully several folks from this team to represent us in that forum. Okay.
You mean the attestation SIG for?
Attestation SIG next Tuesday. I will not be able to attend it. So, all right. So let's do a quick review of these requirements, starting with 1. So 1 simply says that we need to be portable, standard-based. We need to be able to support transport level, application level scenarios, and federation. So this is a I see it as a non-controversial statement. Also, it's aligned with WIMSI because with the trustworthy workload identity token, or sorry, they have the workload identity token with. And that one has binding, so that's good. And they also have support for transport level identity as well. So again, please speak up, otherwise we'll move on to number 2. Number 2 simply says that whether you're on premises, public cloud, some sort of IoT thing, or a laptop, eventually a workload running on your device, if it's capable of contention computing, ought to be able to get workload identity. Number 3, again, this is a list of incarnations that a workload can take. So confidential virtual machines, confidential containers, and pods, which I lumped together. Feel free to challenge that. Enclaves, which is SGX. Serverless, Lambda stem functions. Maybe there's more examples of serverless that we can insert. Cloud and on-premises services. So like Amazon Redshift or like your favorite, Google's analytics service or whatever should be able, like I should be able to run workloads in these. Maybe it needs more elaboration. Maybe it's not all of, a queuing service that has a workload identity, but my instantiation of it, like somehow, what happens with like database triggers, maybe this needs to be further expanded upon. And finally, which is really big in the enterprise, I can tell you, is managed services. So if we have so we're a regulated institution, we deal with a lot of private customer data, highly sensitive data, and then we employ vendors that help us with Databricks, snowflakes of the world, and what we don't want is we don't want them to lose our data, and then we're still, I guess, ultimate custodians of the customer's data. So if they can somehow protect our data in use or our customers' data in use, that would be good. But we do not currently. They basically saying no, it's too hard for us to do. So that's why the last bullet is here. We need to somehow be able to have some confidence that our vendors execute things confidentially and have workload identities to prove that. All right, so I'm just going through them.
So
the
Mark,
fourth one is, yeah.
Before you go, I mean, sorry, it's a naive question, just editorial, I guess. Shouldn't we call it trusted workloads instead of workloads? I mean, if we are going to SPIFFE, if we are going to seek convergence with them, I guess if we define the same term using different terms, that might be perceived as us stepping on their turf. If we coin our own term, I guess that might be more welcome.
Okay, fair question. But if you go into our charter document, in there we have supporting definitions. And in there, we basically said, when we talk about workload, and by the way, we can change that decision. I'm just telling you where we stand right now. Maybe we can, we can introduce a different term. But we basically said, we define workload the same way that Whimsy defines workload, which is an instance of software deployed for a particular purpose. But we're constraining it to the workload is subject to remote attestation. So whenever we talk about workload here, this is basically whatever we can attest.
And we're talking about hardware-based attestation, right? TEE-based, yes?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I was a little loose with that on purpose. And again, feel free to challenge that. But I'm implicitly pulling AWS into it with Nitro. So where I did not say running in the trusted execution environment, I simply said subject to remote attestation. Okay, we can undo this, but I'm just telling you where I'm trying to come from, because as a customer of these technologies, although AWS is not strictly confidential computing, they're close enough. And I'm hoping to pull some of their people in with us to be compatible, but we'll see. But would be nice to have them as well.
The CCC definition of attestation is hardware-based.
Yes, correct. So again, this is in the charter. If we need to edit the charter, it's I just need to reference that pull request, because I believe the pull request has been finally merged. So you'll find it under the governance GitHub repo. So if you want to change the definition of workload, then you can do a pull request on the charter. Okay. So like, if you want me to remind you how it's precisely how it's defined. Workload, as used in this document, restricts the definition of the same term by Whimsy to just that part of the code configuration of the Whimsy-defined workload that is subject to remote attestation. That's, didn't say anything about hardware. But again, that's why that was the rationale. Okay, can we go to number 4 now?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, so I am not happy with this one, and I caught it, and this is my comment. So we're talking about standalone workloads are non-controversial. They come and they go as a unit. Now, if your workload is composite, which means it's made up of multiple components, and then I clarified they share the same lifetime. I don't know if that is a good. So I'll give you an example. I may have a workload identity for a workload that has, internally made up of lambdas. And those lambdas come and go all the time, but the workload, like, cells in your body regenerate, you still remain who you are, right? But the workload still is a, stable entity from that perspective. So I'm thinking that we should probably not have share the same lifetime here, but I just want to make sure this requirement is phrased correctly. So your standalone workload, or maybe composite, right? But it still has to have some sort of a lifetime, even though it's constituent bits don't.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be an entity, an independent entity that has a long-lived identifier or way for other entities to connect to. But as a composite workload, its components don't need and should not be constrained to have the same lifetime, because some of these composite objects or entities or components may actually have different lifetimes that are embedded within the lifetime of the composite workload.
So if I delete that says, how does it read now? And by the way, there is an issue 1 down below that I will probably need to kill. The issue 1 says how to reason about the composition of a workload during its lifetime insofar as how this composition impacts the identity of the workload.
Mark, remind me, I have a fundamental question here. What happens to the individual workload which forms the part of the composite? Do they have a separate independent workload identity, or what we defined as they don't have their separate identity?
I can explain, and we should probably document it in the reference architecture.
Yes.
Okay, so somebody should write it down, but this is how I see it. So there are several, first of all, I believe there are several uses for identity. One, and the workload may have several. A given workload will not have a single identity. It can have several very distinct identities. Okay, so the first one might be for for others to authenticate to it. So let's call it the identity that you present to your clients. Okay, then there is a workload identity that is for the workload to reach out to remote parties. And by the in Whimsy, you see something similar, right? So if I'm a payroll application, I may identify as a payroll application when I go up against a backend that's called the payroll database. And the third type of identity would be the one that is used between the pieces of the composite piece of the workload to identify to each other. Right, and they're not going to be the same identity, because if I have my compute, my virtual machine talking to some queuing service internally to my workload, it's one type of thing. But then if I try to go outside of my workload to talk to some entirely maybe in a different trust domain, it's a different workload identity.
I totally agree, Mark. I think we had discussed that, I think, in the previous meeting, that the word identity itself is very loaded and misunderstood, that we would talk about identifiers.
And we have that in the charter, by the way. All of that is in the charter now.
So, but when we try to describe how a system works, even the word identifier was complicated, and we added the word aliases. So the different ways that a workload represents itself to the outside world, we are more comfortable with the term alias, because an alias can change over time and is fluid, but then is cryptographically bound to the identity of the workload and the identifiers that the workload used to do machine-to-machine authentication and things like that.
Right. So why don't you take an item to put that right up into the reference architecture so we can then move on?
Okay.
Okay. So here we talk about workloads might be standalone or composite. Now, so I think I'm happy that not mentioning lifetimes right now, because again, in the reference architecture, we can get into more details.
Yeah, but there still needs some clarification wording needed about the composite and individual instance and what it means in terms of the architecture we are presenting, or what model we are presenting here.
So we need to decide on every issue like this. Is it part of our requirements? Because we're done with definitions. Maybe alias as a new definition can go into the architecture, but the charter contains the definitions the charter needs. If something like this goes into requirements, we should reflect it here. If something goes into the reference architecture, as soon as we're done with requirements, we log them. We don't think about them as fluid anymore. And then we're going to go and write the reference architecture to address the requirements. So that's why I want to, as soon as possible, I'd like to be done with our requirements so that we can go do the next difficult step. All right, so let's look at 5. So workload may have multiple distinct credentials issued to it for purposes of inbound and outbound internal components for component authentication. So Manu, take a look at this and say, should this be saying anything about aliases here? Because like, again, alias is interesting because like are aliases correlatable? Because this is when you to get into the reference architecture. If, if you're saying that they're aliases, okay, they're still refer to the same entity, but, is it then a good thing or a bad thing if one can be derived from the other? And I don't know the answer to that. Maybe 5 is written well enough. Or maybe we need to say something additional.
No, I agree with the multiple distinct credentials. In fact, in our construct, every entity has relationships with other entities, uses aliases to identify itself to other entities in those relationships. And the intent of the aliases is specifically to decorrelate them so that for privacy reasons, recorrelation is not possible. And indeed, you want to have also distinct credentials because otherwise, because these are cryptographic credentials, those could be used, public keys, for instance, could be used to recorrelate. So you need unique identifier or aliases and credentials for each relationships between different workload entities.
Okay, fair enough. So leave the write-up as is.
Yes, I think it's
okay.
I think it's fair.
Take a look at my comment here. So when they say, does it apply to different components implementing different subservices like GPU to CPU, whatever? This is something in the context of TDISP. Like, do we need workload identity for CPU and GPU to talk? I don't know. Maybe not. Right. I need to dig a little bit into the TDISP architecture.
For things like TDISP, that's a bit of evidence that you use to generate your workload token for the workload, because the purpose of TDISP is just to allow you to decide whether or not a device is okay to bring into the trust boundary of your VM. It doesn't say anything about the particular workload running on that VM whatsoever. So TDISP and SPDM and things like that provide you evidence to make decisions at the workload level, but they don't have an identity in and of themselves, right? It would be like saying, does the TDX TD report need an identity token? No, it's a piece of evidence that goes into the decision to make an identity token for that workload.
So these considerations, they need to be in the reference architecture. So if you feel you understand them enough to write that up, we should be able to. And again, I'm very much in the Hemingway said the first draft of everything is shit. I would really like to write down all these things first, and then we can decide if we like them, we can go change them. But if you have thoughts in your head, pick a section of the reference architecture, write it down, and we'll have one of these meetings where we'll decide it, and like to consider all the pros and cons, but it should not remain in the ether. Okay.
I think we need to document the clear requirements in the first section of the architecture document.
Right. These can be high-level requirements. Right. So we just say, well, you have standalone workloads and composite workloads. You have, multiple credentials per workload, even if it's a standalone workload. Right. So all of that is these are good, but they don't need to be so. This document does not need to be so detailed that it goes beyond requirements. All right. Then, what do you want me to do with this comment? I can turn it into an issue. I can just resolve it. Keep it for now.
I think you should definitely not delete it, because I have a slightly different perspective that the workload, if you had something running on a CPU, something running on the GPU, those two things are themselves entities that may have different lifetimes, different versioning and what's the word we use now, provenance instead of lineage. And so the life cycle and the versioning of these things will matter in the trustworthiness of the composite entity that you're trying to connect to. So I think we should maintain, and each one of those components needs its own identity and its own credentials even if they are paired if the general requirement may collapse in cases where a CPU workload and a GPU workload are deployed at the same time and managed the same way. But the general case should require that those things have different identities.
Okay. So what I don't want to do is leave it as a comment. Comment requires additional discussion. So maybe turn it into an issue, and then we can close it later.
Sure.
All right.
Hello, hi. I'm Jack from Workload. Nice to meet
Yeah,
all
hi.
of you. Hey, yeah. So I'm also in favor of retaining the credentials part of the requirements. It's because like I'm trying to figure out how workloads will authenticate themselves with external entities. So I'm still not sure how to do it. So I just started attending these meetings and I'm trying to figure out, and it looks relevant to what I'm trying to do. So I'm also in favor of keeping this. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so then here we talk about lifetimes. So, right, so we talk composition, we talked about number of credentials issued to workload. Now we're talking about workload lifetime. So some are short-lived, some are long-lived. And of course, the obvious observation here is if your workload is short-lived and you try to do the entire attestation dance for it every time it starts up for several seconds, you're going to blow your verifiers out of the water. You're going to have too much latency, you're going to have too much CPU load. So in the reference architecture, I wrote down my proposal for this. I basically said you can start your workload in the provisioning mode. If it's short-lived, it will get its credentials. It's going to basically seal them to the platform. And then every subsequent time it starts, it can go, you basically use cached credentials. That was my proposal. Again, that's the kind of stuff that goes into reference architecture. Here, I'm just simply stating the requirement that our reference architecture needs to tell us what to do about short-lived workloads as well as long-lived workloads, and they're not going to be the same thing.
So quick question, it's not directly to this, but it's something you just said. You mentioned that you want to rely on the sealing mechanism in the architecture document. Do all TEs have sealing capabilities? I know that SGX has that. I don't know about other implementations.
Well, I believe this is something we may need to mandate.
Okay, fair enough.
And
I would support that. Yeah, I would support that.
Right. And if somebody tells me, no, this is like completely impossible on this type of, silicon, then we ask them, what do you propose that we do for credentials on, if we start up short-lived workloads on your thing? And maybe they'll give us an answer. And then we'll say, well, if you don't have sealing to the platform, the reference architecture says use this. Like, right. But I think for now, seal to the platform. To me, seal to the platform, quote, and random number generation are three core properties that any T must have. But
I'm sorry, you had random number generation. What is the third one you
quote
used?
for attestation.
I think it was evidence is the right word. Quote is like a very Intel specific word.
Well, quote is like an API that your platform signs a statement, right, about who you are, what data you're holding, etc.
It's effectively you're talking about evidence, claims of the evidence. So
enabling attestation is what you're saying.
Yes.
Right.
Agreed.
And then
there's
again, we can write our requirements in the reference architecture and say we assume that the following facilities are present and available. Okay.
Yeah.
Governance.
One second. How do you intend on handling the freshness of those credentials? Because
you're asking the wrong person. Well, I mean, there's lifetime.
That's the problem with cached credentials, right? Like the fact that the system may have changed that from under you after you've been issued the credential. So that makes things very, and I understand, like I worked in HPC for a very long time and we have the stampeding herd problem in HPC as well, right? Where you can't have, 30,000 entities all requesting the same token for a very short-lived time at the same exact time, because then you never get started.
Right.
But that's an important thing that needs to be considered here. The fact that everything you've based your decision on may have changed out from under you at that point.
Yes.
And I don't know if you're trying to solve that problem with platform ceiling, but I'm not really sure that's platform ceilings for more like long-term evidence. It's for things that you don't anticipate changing over long periods of time, not things that may change over a short period of time. Like, for example, the version of the workload itself or things like that.
Yeah. Well, so we'll need to solve that as part of reference architecture. I mean, this is like, we're not yet at a solution stage. So let's just put a pin in it until we get to it. Because as I said, the requirement is that we can handle both short and long-lived workloads. And I just made a reference to the fact that I had an idea. I wrote it in the reference architecture. We can discuss that idea later and decide if it's a good idea or not.
Okay.
Right. So that's the mechanism I'm hoping to be following. Okay. So 7 is just governance, and this is something that the GRC SIG will handle. And I'm here basically explaining, the core requirements, right? And I'm basically saying we're not going to take all governance requirements up here. We're going to say there will be a governance pattern written, and I'm basically incorporating it by reference. But we need governance around this because regulated institutions deploy this technology and need guidance. All right, 8
Hold on, you're
is
going a
about
bit
workload
fast.
migration.
Mark,
Yeah.
you're going a bit fast there. Go back to 7, governance of workload identities.
Yeah.
So this is not a technical requirement. You're saying there's a process, a human process, a corporate process around the management of workloads. Or do you
Or
see
specifically
technical requirements there?
right. So basically governance is, so what is governance? It's being able to articulate your target state, like, right? So governance might be all know your customer is a governance requirement. So you need to know the beneficial owner of every asset.
So my question is there a technical aspect to this? I do believe there is, but did you imply a technical requirement there?
I do imply that there is a set of technical requirements around governance, and that the GRC SIG will take them up. Here, there's just a couple of examples that what governance of workload identities are. So if we have vulnerable workload, we need to be able to identify, isolate, and remedy them. That's a governance requirement. It's also a technical requirement.
I think we should not call it a governance. I think we should call it the policies around workloads, right?
Well, governance is policies, but governance is also levers, right? So how do you govern something? Well, if all you got is a measurement, then you're not governing. You're just observing. Governing also means that you can influence change. So policies, so we also govern policies. Policies get reviewed, policies get approved, policies, maintain histories of policies to know what policy was in effect at what time, right? So it's not just
But how does it impact the workload identity architecture? And I mean, I'm not able to connect to the technical aspect of this governance thing in here. I mean, is it the right place to put it here is the question.
Well, ultimately, what I'm trying to say here is the workload identities need to be governable.
Okay.
So
I think maybe we should reframe the title then. It's slightly confusing.
but that's workload identity. The systems must be governable, including.
So I don't know if I don't think it's capturing other requirements. So maybe this is the place to say it. Is that behind the term governable also means that a relying party must be able to, I hate the word trust, but rely on the governance itself and the reference values and all that good stuff. So is there kind of a recursive requirement here saying that the governance itself should be, attested and verified and run in confidential computing environments? I mean, from our perspective, right, the system architecture that we came up with came from the fact that we realized the verifier codes, the reference values, the endorsements, values, that all of it needs to be, verified with the same level of cryptographic and hardware-backed security, so that the output of the verifier is itself reliable in the sense of a relying party. So is there a technical requirement? Does the word governable basically mean that everything that's upstream to the relying party must itself be run in confidential computing environment?
So I don't want to over-constrain the problem such that deployment becomes an issue, right? So what you're describing is more of a North Star than something that one can practically achieve in production for the next couple of years. So there is sort of a fine line to tread. But if you are in the GRC meetings, so, we separate these things into buckets. So for instance, we talk about, it's not actually, if you just take some code that's written, some random code, and you run it inside a trust execution environment, you didn't actually achieve full confidential computing. You also need to think about, how do I protect my network in-out, and how do I protect my storage input-output, and how do I, there's a number of things. So we have an entire document written on, if you have a confidential payload, this is how you govern it, right? And so verifier has its own governance, and payload upgrades have their own governance, and workload identity is going to have its own governance. And I'm just basically saying, here's a couple of hints as what it must do, but really there's going to be a document on how to govern workload identities. That's going to be a forthcoming document. We're not going to, I'm just trying to say here, I'm just trying to capture the fact that governance is an important part of this, and also point a finger at another place. And we can revisit this decision.
Okay. I mean, as the CCC, our reference architecture should, I believe, reflect the fact that indeed a verifier, the endorsement, the reference values, if any of those things cannot be relied upon, all the hard work that we do in trying to create chips that can be verified at the silicon level is basically wasted. So the weakest link in the chain of verification all the way to the relying party is going to dictate the value of doing all this hard work here. So to me,
I hear you.
Yeah. So
let's put that in the reference architecture.
Yeah, from the CCC perspective, I think we should be bolder because this is, in the next 3 to 5 years, we should say the reference architecture should be the one that it should be the North Star. I think you wrote this in, in some email or some communication. I think. Yeah. Anyway, so
I'm happy to put, make some provisions for governance in the reference architecture. Certainly happy to do that. Here we're just making like note of the fact that whatever it is we define must address governance.
Got it.
Okay. Here, this is workload migration. This is your workload may in fact move, and we just need to ensure that the reference architecture explains how that can happen. And you have to basically, and again, maybe I went into solutioning a little too far, but this is my concern. If your workload migration changes your claims, then it's really not a migration. I don't define it as migration. So if I moved a workload from Germany to, I don't know, Riyadh, and there is a regulation that says your workloads must operate in Germany to access data in Germany, then it would be a circumvention of that requirement if we were to treat the workload as having the same identity after the migration. So that's not migration. That's what I call a redeployment, right? Whereas if I am in a data center, sometimes what they do is they move workloads away from a set of servers so they can go physically upgrade the server hardware, right? And for that, workload migration effectively hides from the customer the fact that the hardware was flipped, basically swapped underneath. And we need to make provisions in the reference architecture to ensure that this is supported and understood how it's done. And we'll talk to folks from Intel and AMD on the silicon primitives around that.
So the concern I have with this is there's a lot of the devil's in the details for this, because let's say you do migrate a workload from one host to another, but let's say for the I'm trying to figure out how much. So I'm from Intel, so our current TEE solution for VMs has multiple product lines. You know, Sapphire Rapids, Granite Rapids, if you need the GPU support, things like that.
Yeah,
you'd be able to migrate. Maybe not from Sapphire Rapids, maybe from Emerald Rapids, from say an Emerald Rapids to a Granite Rapids host. But at that point, the evidence that you use to generate this workload identity token is completely different, right? You've changed from platform to platform, so that'd be what you'd call a redeployment.
correct.
But that might also be the use case that you just said, where you're moving something off of, say you want to move your workload off of older servers onto newer servers so that you can replace the older servers with the new batch of the newer servers that you got it.
Right.
So there's what I'm trying to say is, with the underlying technology, even within the same platform, migration of identity seems hard because the evidence of the underlying platform may change even within the same platform.
Yeah. So this is something, again, that reference architecture needs to address, right? Here, I'm basically only saying that if you, and there, the reference architecture may introduce some, control plane component that decides, how to perform migrations and whether to reissue credentials or keep the old ones or whatever. But this is, again, the requirements simply say we must handle this case. How? We don't know. And the one big rock here is specifically migration may change your overall credentials, in which case your relying party, should not be fooled.
Yeah,
because it's an attack vector. That's all it says.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mark. I think we should really think into those workloads are more than workloads. There are entities, right, that other entities connect to, and they need to know, these other entities, the relying party entities, need to know that indeed a material change happens, like geography being changed, or other relationships that this target workload or entity has with other entities. All of that stuff is material to the relying party. So that's why I agree with that requirement. We need to have that.
Okay, great. So reverse proxies. Reverse proxies are a pain in the ass. But for all sorts of things related to what we do. And I'm just, again, making a note of the fact that our reference architecture must address these things, whatever they're IDS, IPS, or web application firewalls, all of that stuff. TLS terminators, they're all reverse proxies. Okay, so the last ones,
these are simple attestation related
they
requirements.
are, these are the ones I'm hoping to do in the, in close collaboration with the attestation SIG, right? So
Did we lose Mark?
no, you didn't lose me. I'm just looking over them. I don't necessarily want to read from the page. You can read it to yourself. I'm looking for a requirement that I thought I wrote down, but I don't see. And that is workload identity needs to incorporate both the properties of the workload and also the properties of the hosting platform. And I think that may be in the charter. It was mentioned
I think it is
somewhere.
in the charter, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
okay, then we don't need to repeat it here. But please look over 10 to 14. And we just have 5 minutes left. If at the end of this meeting we can say we're happy with requirements, then that next meeting is going to be on gap analysis and the reference architecture.
So regarding number 11, and I apologize if that was already discussed, if so, point me in the right direction. Are we saying that the provenance is kind of only linked into the identity at the time the attester or the evidence is going to get generated? Or are we saying that the workload identity itself is anchored in the provenance? Ergo, we have to, in the architecture document, specify some ties, maybe not the protocol of how they are bound together, but at least some ties as to what we want bound and what level of information we want the workload to be instantiated.
Right. So I gave one example in the charter, in the notes clarification section, where basically said, if you have an X509 SVID, it can have a serial number in it. And that serial number is enough to go talk to the issuer of that credential and say, hey, I understand that you issued this credential. Well, you've given it this serial number. What else can you tell me about why you decided to issue this credential? That would be provenance enough. Okay. And then in the reference architecture, we will cover different types of provenance, how it's bound, like with different examples. But that's the idea is it's not just enough to have a credential issued. You also need to figure out, trace it back. You need to trace it back. And this is something Whimsy doesn't yet do. And this is something that I'm hoping that our collaboration with the IETF can help clarify.
Yes, my angle of asking the question was mostly, hey, are we going to cover at least part of that in the reference architecture? I'm hearing the answer is yes.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Again, these are largely non-technical requirements. They're just like the types of functionality you want. It's the types of scenarios you need to handle. And the reference architecture needs to go into minute details of all these things.
Okay, shall we?
We have a couple of minutes left, so let's take a look at, yeah.
I have a question about 12, where you put, or obtain keys credentials from secret key stores.
Yes.
By allowing this, you actually break the zero trust, strength of confidential computing, because unless the workload can attest or can verify the key store, you've introduced an unverified element in the thing. So I agree with the generate and certify their own keys. I disagree with getting keys from other entities without those entities being themselves attested and verified.
Let's address that in a secret in the reference architecture. Your concern is valid, but if you like, it's a deployability requirement. If you're basically saying if your credentials are kept in credential stores, you cannot have trustworthy workload identity, then you basically said, okay, large numbers of customers, look elsewhere.
Yes and no. I think and there is at the ATF, there is this I forgot the name of the guys who are trying to do attestation of HSMs and things like that. So it basically says, my perspective is that the key store should itself be attested and verified. That's really what I mean.
But again,
maybe it's
architecture can speak to that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think we should create an issue. This needs to be discussed properly. I think we need to create an issue for this somewhere. Track it. What the discussion is happened just now.
This is how you do it. Like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So do that, and under here,
I got to drop now, so I will stop sharing now.
Gosh, you can put that in. Okay,
yeah,
14 is the only one that I want to take a look. Keep or remove, and then we can basically call requirements mostly done.
Yeah, I think that's quite fundamental, right? Remote attestation mechanism for composite workload must be defined.
Right. I'm just like, does it duplicate 4 or not? Maybe it doesn't.
No.
Okay, then let's keep it.
Because this is a attestation requirement more
Yeah.
than the workload identity requirement as such.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I have a hard stop, so I cannot.
All right. We'll talk next week, and we'll also talk about IETF contributions next week.
Yes, I have started working on the draft, and I will share that next week.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you all. We'll see you soon.
See you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
All right. Bye-bye.